All right, well, before we begin, I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this evening's event. I'm Emily, and I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's. Before we begin, I just want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many upcoming events we're looking forward to is cultural critic Rebecca Carroll in conversation with comedian Jesus Nice about her new book, Surviving the White Gaze. That's tomorrow, the 11th. If you don't already, please consider following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Tonight, we are excited to welcome David Pogue and Maxine Bleiweis. David Pogue is the host of 20 science specials on PBS Nova, a 5-time Emmy Award-winning technology and science correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning, and a New York Times bestselling author. In his new book, How to Prepare for Climate Change, A Practical Guide to Surviving the Chaos, he offers a sensible, deeply researched advice about how we should start to ready ourselves for the years ahead. He walks readers through what to grow, what to eat, how to build, how to insure, where to invest, how to prepare your children and pets, and even where to consider relocating when the time comes. He also provides wise tips for managing your anxiety, as well as action plans for riding out every climate catastrophe, from superstorms and wildfires to ticks and epidemics. While it might be too late to stop climate change altogether, he shows us that preparation and adaptation are the next best thing, and there are real concrete actions you can take that will make a difference. Joining Pogue in conversation this evening is groundbreaking Connecticut Public Library Director Maxine Bleiweis. Maxine always suspected that the best resources in the community were often not on the library shelves. Indeed, the best resources were in the people who lived and worked there, often anonymously. When she learned that David Pogue was moving to Westport, Connecticut, it was a natural match to bring him to every event possible, from doing magic tricks for Harry Potter night to giving him space to crowdsource public opinion on technology claims. She now works with libraries and librarians around the world to help them have the courage to be the best. So this evening's event will also include an audience Q&A. Please use the audience Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. And perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting David and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his new book from us. A link to buy How to Prepare for Climate Change will be shared in the chat multiple times this evening. David, Maxine, it's such a pleasure to welcome you. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's
Thank
great
you,
to be here.
Emily.
And
Great to
thank
be
you all for showing up. Hi, everybody.
So, David, greetings.
Hey, Maxine.
So, excitement is afoot for this wonderful book. The excitement kind of reminds me of that night that I enticed you to come to the public library where I was the director and introduce you to the community, because I learned that you had written Magic for Dummies. Many people will probably remember when Harry Potter books came out, they were embargoed until midnight. And we had a party and had to keep everybody engaged. So I asked David to do magic tricks. And I'm sure that was the beginning of your introduction to performing for things like PBS Nova and CBS Sunday Morning, right?
I'm sure it was. I mean, honestly, we could easily do tonight the other way, where I'm interviewing you. You are, I mean, the people who are not Connecticutians and who are not in the library industry may not know what a big deal you are and how revolutionary you have, what revolutionary things you've wrought among libraries. But anyway, and I know how you love books, and I thought you'd be the perfect person to talk about this one.
How fun, how fun. Well, I've always been amazed at everything that you've managed to do, seemingly effortlessly. I swear you just, for your New York Times articles, all you did was just talk them into some dictation device, and you had a perfect column that I used to read every Monday morning. Here we are with How to Prepare for Climate Change, and hot off the press, but I hope it's not adding to our challenges. It's not that hot. So I'm just really happy to be here with you on this journey. Tonight, we're talking about a book that's so different from everything else that you've done. Computer manuals, middle school novels, magic for dummies, opera for dummies. How did this one come about?
It's a strange story. And by the way, speaking of journey, I apologize to everybody for my having a Hilton DoubleTree in St. Paul, Minnesota as my backdrop. But I'm doing a story for CBS Sunday Morning about the science behind face masks and how they're tested and how they're made. And out my window here, I can see the tower headquarters of 3M, which is America's largest maker of the masks. So tomorrow morning, I'll be spending the day over there. So you get to see the glamour of the traveler correspondent life. Yeah, so this book was really, you're right, it's a departure. Most people probably know me as, a tech writer, written a lot of how-to books. It came about because I had a book proposal on a totally different topic. My agent pitched it to the big New York publishers. 8 of them were bidding for it. We went around on one day and visited all 8 publishers. And at the end of the day, we wound up at Simon & Schuster. And Priscilla Payton, their director of nonfiction, said, yeah, we want that book. But we want this to be a 2-book deal. And I want to lay on you my idea for the other one. How to prepare for climate change. It wasn't my idea. It was her idea. But from the instant she said that, I'm like, that is genius. It could be where to live and what to grow and how to talk to your kids and how to invest and how to insure and how to ride out a hurricane, and literally what came out of her mouth was the title of the book. What came out of my mouth was the outline for the book, and neither one of them changed in the 2 years that then elapsed. So really that was it. And I think mainly because I hadn't heard of anyone else talking about preparation for climate change. There are so many books and articles about mitigation, which is the fancy word for reducing your carbon footprint and stopping climate change. All super important, super important. We need to keep doing it. But the climate has changed. Like these wildfires and these hurricanes, this is not a freak that's occurring every year for the last 5 years. This is the way it's going to be. So since we know disaster is coming, why wouldn't we get ready for it now? The book begins with a quote by John Holdren. He was President Obama's chief science advisor. And he said, when it comes to climate change, we have 3 ways to respond. There's mitigation, there's adaptation, and there's suffering. We're going to do a mix of those 3, but how much we do of each is up to us. And so my whole point is, we talk all the time about mitigation, but what about the second half of the equation? What about adaptation? Nobody says anything about it. So I saw a big fat hole in the conversation, and I think that's why I love the idea so much.
Well, and it's already started so much conversation in places that it absolutely needs to. But it's a careful dance that you've done to not annoy the people who still haven't admitted that there's an issue, and keep the folks happy who are working hard towards the kind of policies you're talking about. How did you decide to kind of walk that line?
Yeah, you're right. When we say climate deniers, it's not clear to me what people mean. Are we saying there are people who look out the window and deny that the climate has changed? Are there people who say, no, last year wasn't the hottest year ever recorded, that there weren't more hurricanes last season than any other? I think the number of people who say that nothing has changed is vanishingly small, very tiny number of people. I think these days a climate denier is someone who says that it's not a human-caused event, that this is a natural cycle. And even that even those numbers are much lower than you might expect. They've been dropping every year. The Yale Center for Climate Change Communications does this survey twice a year where they ask Americans about their attitudes toward climate change. And today, they released their latest report. And the number of people who think that the changing climate is a function of natural cycles is 29%. So it's been dropping 4 or 5% every 6 months. And, it's not 50-50. This isn't red state, blue state. This is 29%. You audience members probably know the name David Wallace Wells. He wrote The Uninhabitable Earth. Fantastic writer, fantastic guy. I interviewed him at one point, and he said, I think that's a great number. It was then 33%. He said 33% of the country denying it. Think of how polarized we are. Anytime you can get over 50% of the populace to agree on anything, you're ahead of the game. And he reminded me that 25% of Americans believe that aliens walk among us. So yeah, so 29% is pretty good. But Maxine, I will say the punchline of this answer is whether you think it's man-made, which it is, by the way, or whether you think it's a natural cycle, for the purposes of my book, I don't care. Like the climate is changing. It doesn't matter what the cause is. You still need to prepare. It's still affecting 25 million people a year, these extreme weather disasters. So you should get ready whether it's natural or not.
Yeah, definitely. So, and it's not just about global warming, which is a term that you wish we didn't use because it's not, I mean, even though it was the hottest year last year and we're just reading about the Himalayan avalanches and awful stuff like that. But tell us about other weather stuff, the tornadoes and all that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I hate the word global warming is because it makes people think that the whole problem is, warmer weather. This is where we get that senator who walked into Congress with a snowball 5 years ago and said, "Don't tell me the Earth is warming." What's happening? Yes, the Earth's surface warms, but what that triggers is the dismantling of all kinds of natural systems. So climate change means hotter heat waves and freak snowstorms. It means devastating droughts and intense rains. It means water shortages and flooding. It means all kinds of things just getting out of balance. I've heard the term global weirding. That's pretty good. I've heard climate breakdown. That's another good word. But in the book, I'm talking in the introduction about some of the farther afield effects, farther down the domino chain. I mean, we're talking about smaller goats, more expensive chocolate, lower PSAT scores, more kidney stones.
Talk about the chocolate. Why is it more expensive?
Yeah, chocolate, it turns out, needs specific environmental conditions to grow. The chocolate bean, the cocoa beans. And coffee is in the same category. Starbucks has had to go to elaborate lengths to go down to Central America and relocate the coffee farms. And it's the same thing with chocolate. As the growing conditions become too hot and dry, you can't grow them as easily. So therefore, there are fewer cocoa beans available and the price goes up.
And the goats?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, chamois goats. They normally spend 25% of their waking hours eating, foraging, and nibbling. But now in Europe and the mountains where they live, it's too hot. They get lazy, and they kind of like lie down all day. And so they're not eating as much. So they are now 25% smaller than they were in the 80s.
Okay, PSAT scores.
Yeah, that one's been pretty well studied. A shocking or maybe not surprising number of American schools do not have air conditioning. And when you are hot, your brain does not function as well. So we are actually seeing in the South, PSAT scores drop when compared with the same cohort of students from a couple decades ago. The same effect accounts on the growing number of bar fights and the rising number of divorces in the hotter areas of the country. It's just because we get irritable, we get impatient. It's not our fault. Heat does that to us and to our brains. So so all kinds of nutty things are going on.
So last of your list, kidney stones. Ooh.
Yeah, this is a pet topic of mine. I don't know how much time you got. I've had 3 of these suckers. Kidney stones are the worst. The worst. They are the worst pain your body can do to yourself. It's even worse than childbirth, according to people who've had both. I have not. And the numbers of kidney stones are going up because people get dehydrated, and dehydration leads to kidney stones. So when the our soldiers were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, when they came back from the war, we were seeing these unbelievable numbers of kidney stones, and it's because the heat creeps up on you. You don't stay hydrated. You don't drink enough, and the number of kidney stones go up. That's, by the way to fend off kidney stones, if you've ever had one, they say you can cut your chances of a recurrence by 50% if you carry around lemon water and drink it all day long. I have not left this bottle for 5 years, and I have not had another one. So if you are, especially if you're a gentleman tend to get more of them, lemon water. You heard it here from Dr. Pogue.
And speaking of Dr. Pogue, I just read that the pollen is going to last longer. So we could be on antihistamines for half the year.
Yep, that's right. So the spring is beginning sooner and the fall is ending later. So we have a longer period of pollen in the air. So those who have runny noses and allergies are going to endure it worse. Asthma is also going up because heat creates more ozone low to the ground, and that triggers asthma. So yeah, it's a whole mess of bad stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some people really like the changing climate. Mosquitoes and ticks love it. Mosquitoes and ticks are moving northward from the tropics at a rate of 5.5 miles a day. They're marching northward into places that didn't used to have them, Vermont, Canada. So we have to contend with the diseases that mosquitoes and ticks bring. And there actually are some good things. I mean, it means a longer growing season in the breadbasket areas of the country, although they also have this alternation of drought and intense rain that sometimes counteracts the advantages they get. It means that new shipping lanes are opening in the far north, because they used to be frozen, those areas, all year long. Now ships can get through. And Greenland, which used to be a frozen wasteland, is now shaping up to be the fertile, gold mine of the next century. All these companies are investing in Greenland land to develop it for agriculture because it's going to be temperate and beautiful.
So you just said the word investment. It made me think about GM's announcement. Want to talk about that? Was that done out of the goodness of their heart or a financial decision?
No, it was not altruistic. But I mean, what a shock, man. I mean, I've been reporting on electric cars for CBS Sunday Morning for 15 years, and I've been to GM several times, interviewed the executives. General Motors is the biggest, most corporate, most calcified, slow-moving, ultimate, old-school car company that ever lived. And for them to announce that in 14 years, they're going to become a 100% electric car company, it is, absolutely mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. And from the perspective of the planet, like a really amazing thing. But as you say, this isn't just like, we want to save the planet. It's not quite like that. An increasing number of countries, 15 countries plus California, have all announced dates when the country itself will ban gasoline cars. Now, GM sells cars globally. They see the writing on the wall. They need to be ready with their lineup of cars and trucks that will be electric when that's all they're allowed to sell. But overall, like, who cares what the reason is, right? I mean, it's a fantastic thing. It's going to set off a ripple effect. It's going to affect other car companies. It's going to affect legislation. Until last year, as recently as last year, no Tesla dealerships were allowed in the state of Michigan, where General Motors is, because they lobbied so hard against electric cars that the state legislature was in their pocket. I mean, the ripple effects are going to be enormous. Mm-hmm. And by the way, 2 years ago, I finally bought the cheap Tesla, the Model 3, the $37,000 one, although I got $3,000 back from Connecticut and $5,000 back from the federal government. So this car is amazing. 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. It makes no sound. it is the greatest thing. When you guys get your first electric car, you will not know what hit you. You will never have had so much fun driving.
And all you have to do is replace your tires.
Yeah, that's right. They have like no moving part. Yeah, that's right. They have what is it? 1/100th the number of moving parts in an electric car because there's no engine, there's no pistons, no spark plugs, there's no emissions checks, there's no oil. It's just a battery and a motor that moves the wheels.
So let's just turn to the pandemic for a minute. The Biden administration has been putting all sorts of things in play as fast as they can. How is getting us out of the pandemic maybe coming together with helping our climate change issues?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, they don't seem to be immediately related. I know the Biden administration would like to wipe out both problems together. I think the one way you could argue that it's a natural fit to address both problems together is that no one in America seems to mind this gigantic spending spree of trillions of dollars to help people who are starving and out of work, right? Like, we know this is a necessary expenditure. So it may be that, like, loosening up our minds about these trillion-dollar expenditures will open our minds to climate change gestures as well. I think that may be the connection, that it's sort of an opportunity for a big national reset in all different ways, you know, like the WPA or the New Deal or whatever. So there are, and he also would like to do all of this equitably. It's well researched that climate change disproportionately affects poor communities and people of color. A lot of historical, really upsetting reasons why that is. But if he can pull this off to address, you know, COVID and decarbonizing society and to do it fairly, that would be some pretty great goal to shoot for, I would say. He seems to be, by the way, really, really serious about the climate stuff. I mean, you can see by the fact that he's created new positions. You know, he's got John Kerry and Gina McCarthy and a lot of really great, knowledgeable people in these offices, and he has climate change as part of every discussion in every department now. And I think that's the way to do it. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah, it's helpful. So the pandemic has made us stay home. I can walk down literally the middle of my streets when I go out for a walk, and there are no cars. You know, people are having gardens for the first time and growing things. Do you think any of this will continue?
I do, yeah. I'm not sure it's because, you know, it had such a tremendous effect on emissions. I don't know if you all are aware of this, but in April of last year, we hit a 17% drop in greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. The biggest drop since greenhouse gas emissions began in the Industrial Revolution. And in the United States, it's been about a 10% drop. Now, the reason for this is very upsetting. It's because nobody was working, and all the factories were sitting empty, and the buildings were sitting empty. So that's not a great reason. But what it does do is it shows us that we can affect the emissions problem really quickly. We have our hand on the lever, and it really works. So yeah, I think some of this will stick for climate reasons and cost reasons. The big one, of course, is so many companies have now seen that they can work remotely. I mean, I've heard so many companies, not all of them, but so many companies say, when the pandemic is over, you can stay home. You can keep working from home. Like, it's worked out fine that way. So there's that. And then you have to wonder, we learned to fill our time with interesting things other than travel. You know, there sprouted up these Amazon experiences and Airbnb experiences where you can sort of virtually travel with a host in another country. Super fun. So you got to wonder, will that change? You got to wonder, what has there been to do with our families? For my family, it's been taking a lot of walks. We walk every day, every single day before dinner. Come on, guys, get off the couch. And we've walked in all kind of crazy new parts of our county. Turns out turns out, I don't know if you know this, Maxine, we have like 44 beautiful woodsy parks
Yeah,
in
yeah.
our I've lived there 15 years. I never knew about these parks. So anyway, we've been exploring those. So who knows? Maybe that's the new going out for a drive. Some percent of people will stick with their patterns from the pandemic, and all of that is beneficial for lowering emissions.
Um, you talk a lot in the book about places to live. I live 2 blocks from a large body of water, that flows into the Atlantic Ocean. Should I be putting up a for sale sign?
This is a tricky one. It is probably the number one question people have about the book is, you say there's a chapter called Where to Live. What's the answer? First, let me talk about, though, the concept of moving in general. So obviously, not everybody can afford to move. Not everyone who can afford to move is going to do it because it means uprooting what you know, uprooting from your social network. That said, there are 40 million Americans a year who do move anyway because they're retiring, they're getting married or divorced, or getting out of the military, or graduating, or getting a job. And increasingly, I wouldn't say climate is the number one criterion for where they're moving, but increasingly it's a factor. A lot of people moving out of Florida or out of the wildfire zones of California, they've just had enough. And so, given that people are going to take this into account, where should you move? So the formula goes like this. You want to be east far enough away from the wildfire country. You want to be west far enough from the superstorms of the East Coast and the ticks and the mosquitoes. You want to be north far enough from the Gulf coasts where most of the hurricanes hit, and most of the brutal heat is in the south. And then something a lot of people don't talk about is the drought in this country. The entire western half of the U.S. is really running into a drinking water problem. Where do we get our drinking water? Well, a lot of states get it from aquifers, which are these giant underground deposits of water. And those are at historic lows all over the world. Out west, they get a lot of their water from snow melt. The snows of the winter melt, go into the rivers and trickle down, and we harvest that. Well, the winters are shorter and warmer, and there's not much snow up there. So there's not much snow melt. The Hoover Dam in Nevada created this 110-mile lake called Lake Mead that provides drinking water for 25 million people in California and Nevada. It's now 1/3 full, and it's dropping continuously. So when you think about where to move, it's not just weather, it's water. So the answer that everybody gave me, by the way, I'm not an expert on any of the topics in this book. The entire book was an exercise in interviewing experts and synthesizing and reading and explaining. They all said the Great Lakes area. So the grand old Rust Belt cities, Cleveland, Buffalo, Madison, Wisconsin, Duluth, Syracuse, all those cities are cool. They don't have wildfires. They don't have hurricanes. Unlimited fresh, clean drinking water from the Great Lakes forever. And there's more to choosing a place to live than climate, of course. You want to consider cost of living, and are there jobs, and can these cities accommodate an influx of people from more southern regions? And those grand old cities do have all that, along with sports teams, symphonies, art museums, recreation, boating, and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny because I grew up in Cleveland, and I grew up during the time when, the Cuyahoga River caught fire and the mayor's hair caught on fire, and we were just the laughing stock during the 70s. And so Cleveland is like, well, turns out we're a climate haven city. What do you think about that? So yeah, its time is coming.
So back to my house. I haven't read my insurance policy, well, maybe ever. Want to give me a quick primer on what I should be thinking about?
Yes, I do. I spent the entire summer of 2020 learning about insurance and flood insurance, especially. I mean, I could go on for an hour on the topic. Like my wife says, like, you're a gas at parties, you know that. Like I could stand there in the corner and talk about the National Flood Insurance Program without stopping. So flood insurance is a separate purchase. You all might have homeowners insurance. It doesn't cover flood. Flood damage, you are out of luck. And of the people who live in flood zones in the United States, 18% have bought that flood insurance. Everybody else is sitting ducks. You, my dear Maxine, if you have not bought a separate flood insurance policy and you live near water, you're asking for it. It is, I mean, there's nothing worse than coming back to your flooded or burned home and realizing that you were underinsured. I mean, it's just insult to injury. It's the worst. There used to be such a thing as private flood insurance, from Allstate and Nationwide and things like that. And then in 1992, Hurricane Andrew hit Florida and put all those companies out of business. It was so expensive to fulfill those policies that they lost billions of dollars. And they said, that's it, man. No more flood insurance in this country. They all got out of it. So in those days, Congress realized that no one was providing flood insurance, and they invented a flood insurance program run by FEMA. Yeah, like you're doing a hell of a job, Brownie, that FEMA. And it's a separate purchase, and it's very clever. You can't get a mortgage in any of the floodable counties if you don't have this flood insurance from the government. They're tied together, so they force you to get it. However, the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, is $25 billion in debt because of all these hurricanes we've had. The rates you pay are based on these really coarse measurements, like not your lot, but your neighborhood. So they're really old measurements. They don't keep up with current projections of the future of flooding and sea level rise. So they're based on really old measurements. So basically, and if you do have a flood, it's not like car insurance where your rates go up after each accident. The government never raises your rates, no matter how many times you're flooded. In that book, I talk about this one house in Texas that's been flooded something like 21 times since 1970, and the government has paid to rebuild that house every single time and never raised the rates. So there is change coming. Everybody knows this. And this October, they're going to enact this new thing called Risk Rating 2.0, which will totally revamp how they calculate these rates. Now it's going to be not just on, your block, but your property and which corner of your property, like really fine-grained calculations. And it's going to make the rates snap to market value. Right now, the rates are really way too low for what you should be paying. And so what that means is half of Americans who have this flood insurance, and it's millions and millions of people, will see their rates jack up sky high, and they'll be furious because they've been paying underrepresentative rates for years. The other half will see their rates fall way low because they've been overcalculated for years, and they'll be furious because why the hell have I been paying so much all this time? So I would not like to be a congressperson this October when all this stuff comes to pass.
No.
But anyway, yes, the biggest takeaway from the book is you probably don't know what's in your insurance right now. You probably don't know what's covered, what's not covered. You need to know in the new era. For example, you're probably thinking, wherever I live, I'm not on the coast. I don't need to worry about flooding.
Right.
Yeah, you do. 7 of the 10 top flooded states last year, and this is as calculated by federal disaster area declarations, were not on the coast. These are floods from extreme rains, from overflowing banks, from Michigan's dams breaking. I mean, flooding is universal.
Wow. So I'll need to make up for what I'm going to have to pay for in flood insurance. So what should I be investing in?
Oh yeah. This was a tricky topic. My editor and I had a long chat about whether there should be a chapter called How to Invest, because I'm suggesting that we can profit from the changing climate. And of course, a very small number of Americans actually plays the stock market and makes individual investments. Ultimately, I decided to do it because when you invest in companies that are trying to address climate change themselves, companies whose work it is to reduce emissions, you are making the world better for everybody. So yes, you will make money, but you will also help the problem along and accelerate our decarbonization efforts. It turns out that if you do have money to invest, just about the worst investment you could have made in the last 10 years is traditional energy stocks like fossil fuels. Those stocks are down 12% in the last 4 years, whereas renewable energy stocks are up 60% in the same period. I mean, this is where all the investment is going. You might, should I give some of my individual picks? Should I be E.F. Hutton?
Absolutely. I'm sure the audience would love to know who to invest in.
When David Pogue talks.
E.F. Hutton.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. All right. So the first thought might be, well, let's invest in solar panels. Clearly, that's the future. And yes, you're right, but that's what makes them a bad investment. The price of solar panels has fallen so rapidly, like 1,400% in the last few years, much faster than anybody could have predicted even 5 years ago. It is now so cheap to put up solar panels. And that is because these Chinese factories have made them a commodity. They're making them copiously, they're making them inexpensively. So it's a race to the bottom, really. So you don't want to invest in solar. You don't want to invest in wind for the same reason. Wind power is one of the cheapest sources of energy we have. The price has just dropped. Not a way to make money. But here's the flip side. An increasing number of states have mandated that they're going to get their future electricity from renewable power. New York, California, Hawaii have all said that within 9 years, they got to get 50% of their power from renewable clean energy. So who's going to provide that? Who will they be paying to deliver it? Well, it's the utility companies. The utility companies like NextEra and Xcel Energy, they are the ones who are going to profit hand over fist from renewable energy, because think about it. Unlike coal, oil, and gas, they don't have to pay anything for raw materials. So their cost goes down. And do you think they're going to lower your rates on the other end? Of course not. So their profits will go up as their expenses go down. So yeah, so you invest in the big utility companies. Another source that everybody can identify is electric cars. As we've previously discussed, electric cars are going to be the new thing. You could invest in individual car companies, of course, but why not think smart and think upstream from the individual car companies? They all need lithium-ion batteries, and there are only 4 companies in the world that make them. They're all Asian: LG, Samsung, Panasonic, and one other. So you can invest in those folks. Or think even farther upstream. Where do they get the lithium? Someone's mining the lithium for the car batteries that will soon be in every single car. So there are companies like, there's an American company called Albemarle, and then there's a Chilean company that does a lot of lithium mining. So you can think along those lines too. And lastly, I'll just say, there's a lot of smaller tectonic shifts that are happening. We know that as the planet warms, the farming zones are going to shift northward, right? So our breadbasket states, the United States, are going to be too hot and dry to be as productive as they have been. So they're moving northward toward Canada. There are going to be new farms in new places. And that means people buying farm equipment. So John Deere and Navistar, people are going to be having to buy farm equipment. My own investment advisor tipped me off about that one from Morgan Stanley. I'm like, that actually makes sense. So anyway, water. And by the way, instead of investing in individual stocks, as everybody knows, it's safer to invest in mutual funds or ETFs. That way you're not hosed if one company goes under. And you know, in the chapter, I've named one of these funds for each of these categories, so you're a little more protected if things go south.
One of the things that struck me that you talk about a lot is how when we feel helpless and in despair, we need to do something.
Yeah.
You know, having a plan for the inevitable, all that is a good thing. Can you
Yeah, my editor calls this the first uplifting book about climate change because it's for that very reason. You know, depression can be defined not as just feeling like your situation is terrible. It's the feeling that your situation is terrible and you're helpless to change things. You can't do anything about it. You have no control. So, as any therapist will tell you, you know, the first thing is take some action, do something to change your situation. When I was researching this book, I read about this fascinating study in a federal penitentiary where there are tremendous mental health issues. You know, of course, you're depressed, you're enclosed, you have very little control over your fate. But they would offer inmates little things, like they would make it your turn to set up the seating for the Friday night movie. You can put out the chairs how you want. And even these small gestures of control improved the mental health situation within the prison. So it's really the same thing. If you feel eco-despair or, you know, climate anxiety, which millions and millions and millions of people do, taking some action to prepare is an antidote. You know, whether it's small gestures or large gestures, or joining up with a group of people who feel the way you do, or writing a letter to Congress, small actions, making a go bag so you're ready to evacuate the house on a moment's notice when you get warning that a disaster is coming, having a conversation with your family about what you would do if the cell towers went out during a fire or a superstorm. That happens during fires and superstorms. The family is split up and you can't communicate. If you talk about it now, this Saturday night over dinner, where will we meet? You know, who will be our out-of-state contact? What relative can be our headquarters that we can all check in with if for some reason we can't communicate each other? So all of these little steps do two things. They make you actually readier for disasters, but they also make you sleep better at night because you feel like you've taken steps to take control of your situation. And I should say, I did a bunch of this stuff in this book.
Yeah.
I mean, as I went along, I'm like, you're right. I have no idea what's in my insurance policy. And, you know, I looked it up and I actually called the broker and I'm like, what is this? And they explained it to me and it turned out my insurance was totally wrong for too much on some things, not enough on others. We made go bags, you know, with my son. It was fun. It was a scavenger hunt. And, oh, here's one more thing. Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, Maxine. Yes, of course I do. What am I talking about? Here's another free one that all of you guys can do right now. There's an app made by the Red Cross. It's just called Emergency. And you download this app onto your smartphone. You put in your address, your parents' address, your children's address, your workplace, whatever. And it will track all of these places in the years going forward. You can bury that app in a folder somewhere and forget all about it. But if there's ever a disaster approaching, either a weather disaster or a man-made disaster, a chemical plant blowing up or whatever, it gives you early warning. It'll beep and chime and get your attention. In every one of those hurricanes and wildfires we've been reading about, people die because they never got word. You know, it was on the radio, it was on the TV. But if you're sleeping, if you're old and your hearing aids aren't in, you know, whatever, people die because they don't get word. But this app will make sure that you're one of the people who get warned early. You can be at the head of that long snaking line of traffic out of town instead of at the end of it. It can save your life. It's free. It takes 2 minutes to set up.
Thank you. I think we've got some questions. Let's see, what do we got here? How will electric cars and their batteries be recycled or broken down in the future?
Excellent question. The electric batteries in these cars have roughly the same life as a car, 10 years, 15 years. They're too new yet to know exactly what happens, but the master plan is to use them, excuse me, to repurpose them as home batteries or even grid batteries. So you may have heard that the problem with solar power and wind power is that they are both intermittent, right? We only get power from the sun when it's shining. We only get power from the wind when it's blowing. So the solution is going to be massive industrial strength battery banks. We're going to store that power when it's being generated and feed it out to the homes when we need it. So there's talk of being able to take these batteries. Remember, they don't just die overnight. You know, a lithium ion battery is good for X number of recharges, and then it starts holding less per charge. But it doesn't just like stop holding any charge. So if you had hundreds of thousands of these things, you could rig them together to be grid batteries or batteries in our homes to store our own solar power generated during the day to use at night. That's what I've read.
Someone else wants to know if farming equipment will begin to operate electrically, or how farming equipment will operate.
I would guess so. I don't know. It's a good question. I haven't looked into it. What I have looked into, though, is precision agriculture, which is tractors, even self-driving tractors and tillers and other equipment that has sensors all over it that knows exactly how much moisture, heat, warmth, sun each part of the field is getting, and putting on the fertilizer or the water accordingly, instead of just blanket covering the entire farm with the same irrigation. And that's one of the ways we're going to be able to get more productivity out of our farms at a time when climate change is making it harder to grow stuff. But I don't know. I would imagine everything will electrify, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Wind turbine question about the causing barometric pressure explosion in bats and birds' lungs. What's the fix for the damage done to the species?
I don't know. I hadn't heard about the barometric pressure explosions. I will add it to my list of things to look up.
Okay. Well, you have such incredible sources that helped you with this book that you interviewed. I'm sure there's somebody out there. Do you think true global sustainability can coexist with capitalism?
That is a phenomenal question. That is at the heart of course, the political debate over whether we should take actions. So, is it possible to decarbonize without losing jobs? And well, I mean, that's part of the incompatibility with capitalism question. A lot of experts that I spoke to would say no. Let me answer the bigger question first. No. Capitalism, this consumption-driven American way of life, is at odds with becoming sustainable. There are many movements, as you know, to buy used, to minimize your consumption in all realms of your life, that on this trajectory, we're never really going to cool the planet down to, let's say, 1980s levels. It's a huge problem. I mean, we're now recognizing the flaws of the whole consumption-oriented capitalistic approach. I don't know of how we're going to get out of that. But the jobs thing, I do know more about. Already, the solar industry provides more jobs than the entire coal industry. We didn't hear that during the recent presidential administration. And Joe Biden has said that there are going to be winners and losers. I mean, there is with every technological shift. You know, his hope is that we can offer retraining for people in the fossil fuel industry who lose their jobs, maybe some help relocating, help them find other jobs. We don't know exactly how successful he'll be with that. The government is aware of the problem. But I think in general, the premise is that as we decarbonize, we will create many more jobs than we will lose on balance. And I tend to believe that. I mean, we are talking about spending trillions of dollars to update our grid, to go to sustainable sources of power, to clean up the mess we've made. And workers are going to be at the receiving end of that. The trick is, how can we make sure nobody's left behind?
Well, speaking of left behind, there's another question that says, what will happen to abandoned farmland as farms move farther north?
I don't know. Another great question. I would guess that different farms can grow different things. certain crops require certain climates to grow. And that's what's shifting northward. The worst case scenarios are Dust Bowl. I mean, the worst case scenarios, if it was business as usual in our country without any adaptation at all, then we're talking about dry, dusty, ungrowable lands. Now it looks like the world is sort of waking up to the climate change problem. Too late, but waking up. And it's possible that we can avoid the worst case projections of climate change. So maybe it won't be that bad. But that's so I would say either we grow something different, or worst case it turns into Dust Bowl.
Yeah. We've got about just a couple of minutes left, and and there's still more questions. So you might want to give a way to contact you. But the most fun question, well, or depressing question, is I assume he's talking about chocolate truffles, but will they be gone by late in the century?
Or do you mean truffles like the ones that the pigs sniff out, the fungus?
My guess is chocolate.
Yeah, I don't know. There is some really, again, I don't know, superb questions. Do keep in mind that this is a book about adaptation, which is coping with climate change. It is not a book about mitigation, or even prediction. So that's why I'm sort of at sea with some of the questions here. But there are some really significant changes in where things are growing. I just read that they will no longer be growing champagne grapes in the Champagne region of France, because wine grapes are another one of those things that requires very particular moisture, humidity, and heat. And so it's another one of these shifts where everything is moving north for the growing regions. And I should say, by the way, one other thing about my earlier comments about adaptation: the big organizations like governments and industries and corporations, they are adapting. They are building seawalls. They are planting drought-resistant seeds. They are setting up new city design guidelines. The big entities are adapting already. So what I meant to say is that the whole in adaptation is personal adaptation. It's you and your family. And that, I feel, is like stuff that no one's been talking about. And I think it's time.
Absolutely time. Thank you, David. As a librarian, I would tell everybody to go out and borrow the book, but not this one. I say buy one and then buy several more for everybody you care about.
You're so kind, Maxine. Thank you. One more thing for those of you who are nice enough to show up tonight. If this were an in-person book talk, which it's not because of the pandemic, we would now gather around a table and I would autograph any copies of your books. I don't want to deprive you of that, so I am willing to offer the Powell's audience the following deal. If you buy the book and email me the receipt or a picture of your proof of purchase, whatever, my email address is Pogue, my last name, Pogue, Pogue at me.com, Pogue at me.com. I will mail you by U.S. mail an autographed book plate, like a sticker that you put in the front of the book. It'll look almost exactly like I signed it in person.
And maybe those questions, any that didn't get answered, you could add those too. So.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, please email me your questions, pogue at me.com. I will answer every single one, and I'll even do some research on some of the ones I didn't know the answers to.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Maxine. Thank you all. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. That was amazing. And thank you everyone for coming to join us. I feel like I have a lot of stock options to look at now. So thank you for that. Please do consider buying a copy of David's book online at powells.com, and do check out our lineup of upcoming events. We look forward to seeing you at another one soon. David, Maxine, everyone, have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye all.